Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Zeitcast. My name is Jonathan Martin. Thank you for joining us. I'm here with my wife, Nicole. I'm so happy to be able to do this together. We've only done it this way a couple times, but...
One time.
One time. You're right. One time. Officially.
Yeah.
The truth is, we have these kind of conversations all the time. Most of my life. Is that fair to say? Maybe most of my life is in...
Yeah. How many hours today? 5 or 6?
Let's... In a non-performative way, how many hours today?
I don't even know. I mean, a lot. More than most couples talk about anything, I'm sure.
I think we might have more conversation today than most couples have in a week.
Yeah.
And that's not like because we're so relationally healthy. It's just more like, I mean, you can judge that how you will. We talk about a lot of things. And I did think the best thing for this particular conversation, because we have been talking about a lot of big things, a lot of heavy things. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of fun also. As my recent videos have been a little more fun. I'm trying to have some, why don't you roll your eyes?
I didn't roll my eyes. Very fun.
I'm trying to have some joy in my life.
I'm very into you channeling all of the social commentary into comedy.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm there for it.
My very Southern character, you know, that feels like the most natural way to talk. So it's really like, I really want to do that now because it's very like, it's kind of, it's really where I live.
Also, how else do you respond to this moment in time?
How else do you respond? That is it.
Than comedy.
That is it. Tragedy, comedy, two ends of the continuum. Yeah. And I do feel like that comedy is is the healthier way to go than just tears. But we do this a lot. And I do think like in a really non-pretentious way, I'm always thinking, I wish people could just overhear this. And even when people will reach out and ask me certain kinds of questions, I'm like, I love to field them, but I wish more so they could kind of overhear the conversations that we're already having. Yeah. But you're much more structured in how you think about these things. So I've said hello to everyone. I want to officially kick this over to you, and I'm going to just let you roll, and you just
okay. Well,
you just drive.
Since this is like the second time we've done this, I feel like we could go a lot of different directions. And there could be different expectations of what we would say in our second podcast. But honestly, none of us are talking about anything except the craziness of the time we're living in.
Yeah.
Which is so many things happening at once is all we're talking about. So we just thought we would do like a quick highlight reel thoughts. When I hear people that I love or people that I respect their opinions, just naming the moment that we're in, giving any sort of hot take that doesn't feel like some hateful reactive thing. It's very cathartic to me. So I thought we would just do that.
Though it should be noted that I am technically unprepared for this conversation in a way that I want to be. I think I like kind of coming in like a little bit cold. I feel like you've got your guns loaded in a good way. There are a lot of things you've been thinking about, reading about.
It's funny because the last conversation and this one will be me asking you some questions, which is very different from the rest of our lives, where I'm just basically telling you everything that I think.
Well, also, you don't act like I'm not asking you questions all the time.
It's true. I know. But I don't do almost
anything without.
I do look to you for more of a grounded theological perspective because I run a little hot. So when current events are happening,
theological perspective,
a little hot about them.
It's arguable whether I have a grounded theological perspective, but if I do, that's the only perspective I have. And then their real life is comprised of a whole lot of other things, which is why I ask you a lot of questions. So,
but you are wise. You have more of a perennial wisdom perspective that I aspire to.
Ooh, all right. Okay.
Even in the midst of all of your comedic takes lately, I do feel like that's there.
Even though I've been leaning into the hot takes.
Yeah. So let's just start right off the top with current election cycle craziness, because the last 2 weeks we've actually been talking about doing this, and every single day that's gone on, it's changed as far as what we're going to talk about, because that's just how fast it's happening. Yeah. So what do we talk about in the current election cycle?
Yeah.
Here's my first question.
Okay.
Because this is true about you. You always predict what's going to happen before it happens. And I don't know how you do that. I want to know how you do it. But we were waiting to see what Biden did, whether he's going to stay in, step down. He told me how many weeks ago, like a month ago, what was going to happen. How do you have that kind of discernment?
Okay.
He still has his finger on politics, not just like from a theological perspective, but he just knows what's going to happen. No joke. The last election, I was like, baby, are we going to be okay? What's going to happen? And he kept reassuring me what's going to happen. I don't think that panned out in 2016 so much.
In fairness, we weren't, which was before us, but I did not make, but in fairness, I did not make a formal prediction in 2016.
Okay. Well, okay, that's fair. Yeah. So how do you think that you have your finger on things the way that you do?
Okay. Y'all, so this requires a whole lot of disclaimers. So the first thing I want to say, because I feel like Rain Man in the film, is that if you take me out to the racetrack and you try to, you don't
like to be referred
have
to
me gambling. If you try to have me place bets on horses, I can assure you that it's not going to go well. I do not think or claim to have any sort of prophetic powers. I don't claim to be Nostradamus or some kind of a Christian mystic when it comes to these things. What I will say, for better or for worse, is that I don't make predictions lightly. Is that fair to say? I don't I don't just go around saying, here's what it's going to be. I don't call every playoff series in the NBA playoffs, like whatever. Sometimes from afar off, I will say, here's how things are going to go. And Nicole seems to think that mostly works out. So, and I think this is kind of spread now to our kids and like to our daughters in particular. And I'm happy like that this mythology.
The children are like, what is Jonathan saying? Because we need the comfort, or we need the direction of how we're supposed to feel with this, because it more often than not.
I feel like this will elevate expectations higher than they should be for folks. I will say on what you referred to about Biden stepping aside, here was my sense of that. I felt like people were still having these kind of philosophical arguments about whether or not it was the best thing for the Democratic Party going up against Trump for him to step aside. Whereas in my mind, because I don't know, I do try to read the tea leaves about things and I try to stay dialed into a lot of sources. It seemed to me to be a foregone conclusion that enough insiders had already made this shift to where, it doesn't matter what kind of ego you have. No general is going to go out to battle without troops if the party's not with you, if your people, if your core is not with you. And I did feel like probably not long after the debate debacle, really, that it was unsustainable that he stay on the ticket. There was enough momentum, there was enough energy within the party among their own people that it's like, okay, well, that's just not sustainable. There's no way. Yeah. So I did feel confident of that. And even though, I feel like I read this a lot later, the accounts were that I think there actually was, I don't think there was anything strategic or conspiratorial. I think there really was a lot of back and forth. Probably Biden and some folks in the inner circle really wanted to stay in. We're hoping that one of these appearances or something would turn things around. Yeah. I think that was real. Yeah. But I did maintain pretty robustly, no, this is actually going to happen. Because for me, just the political calculus was there. It's kind of like, I think enough folks have shifted on the interior. You can't run against the other side and also run against the New York Times and also run against, I didn't buy the narrative like party elites. I think it was more so everyday folks saw this debate performance and were freaking out. And I think they actually are picking up the phone, knocking, ringing the doorbell, whatever, for their own senators and Congress people, all those kinds of things. And I think people heard that. I think it was more a reflection of where the electorate was than it was like some sort of, the whole language of a coup or like whatever. But I did feel pretty confident that was going to happen. No, I don't claim that.
He was in my ear the whole time. And it's hard because you want to be loyal because we're at a particular moment in time where democracy is at stake. So loyalty seems to be more important, but then also you don't want to be blind and blindly supporting a thing, which I feel like other people in other camps tend to do. Like you're not being truthful about the thing that you're seeing. Right. So it was a really difficult position to be in and know how to be honest and to gauge it honestly. And of course, I feel like maybe this might be like a fundamentalist thing that I reverted to with, I was reading Alan Lichtman's 7 Keys to the White House. And it's like, I want someone to be able to predict this with certainty so then I can know where to land.
And I was making fun of that because it seemed too mythological for me. I get it, but it did feel like a little too wooden for the moment we were in. It was kind of like, I don't think all of what's happening this fits a script.
But
it's like Calvinism. It's sort of,
I know I needed to know the keys. I needed to know the certainties before I could land a certain way. But yeah, so I feel like you always kind of predict these things in advance. And
maybe it'd be helpful for friends to know this too, that like kind of I have these competing instincts because I think in another life, I'm not saying I'm good at this, but you know how much I love all things politics. And then I watch not only current things, like in this election cycle, while it's been on my mind, I've watched so many documentaries about like other campaigns. It's been a motive in like in another life, I would have been thrilled to have been like a speechwriter or, something like inside politics would very much feel like it could have been in my bag. What's weird, and again, I don't claim I'm gifted in this way either, but when you feel like there's this sort of pastoral thing you're supposed to be doing or prophetic thing you're supposed to be doing, I was speaking in New Mexico 2 weeks ago for some good friends. And while I was there, we got to go to, we went to the Center for Contemplation and Action. A lot of people know that because of Father Richard Rohr. I was not with Father Rohr, but talking to our new friends at the center. And I told them this because I do love Father Rohr, how so often certain things will kind of come across, just things are happening in the world, things I'm thinking about, things I'd like to say. And I'll think, well, what would Father Richard do in this situation? And then I'll think, I definitely don't think Father Richard would say that. And then I'll think, but then I'll also be like, but I don't know if I'm Father Richard. And I'm torn because I kind of like both want to be true to the more like pastoral prophetic thing. And then other times I really just want to burn it down and give my hot takes and have a good time. And those two dogs are fighting every day.
What was the meme you made about like perennial wisdom versus your hot take?
Yeah, the guy holding hands with his girlfriend and then like sees the other girl walk past, and I like plugged into it. It's like he's holding hands with perennial wisdom, but the girl walking past is my own spiciest hot takes because really I love to do that, and I love to speculate, and I love to riff, and I love to think more kind of strategically about things in that way. But then also it seems like by the time I actually get around to weighing in on something for good or for ill, I'm not saying it's divine, I'm not saying it's Holy Spirit, whatever, but always what seems to kind of land on me more is some sense of responsibility to do something for like a greater good where I minimize all that. Maybe it's at some point I'll throw all that out, but
sometimes the spicy hot takes though just help you cope.
Yeah, that's right.
You have to laugh. You have to make fun. That's why I feel like this whole like this is all weird. It just feels like strangely cathartic. Because it's weird. You know what I mean? Like you don't even have to label it anything else. This stuff is just weird.
Yeah.
And,
for sure.
And we can just make light of it, even though it might be the end of democracy as we know it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into things.
Okay.
So I'm talking about Kamala. Because there is a lot being said, and I have a lot of feelings about it.
Yeah.
I feel like before she was really in the conversation, as far as back when you were predicting this when it was going to happen, when people were like, no way, she's going to, be a contender. There is this response from so many people in our circles that like, we just don't like her. We don't like her. She puts us off, and they can't really give reasons for it.
Yeah.
And I kept pressing people like, why don't you like her? Like, name specific things that you don't like. What are the policies? What are the things you're objecting to? And it's just this general, like, I just don't like her and I can't really name the reason why. And I feel like all of those reasons why the last few weeks have been coming to the surface. Yeah. They are being named. What would you say to that? Because I know you're hearing the same things. And as a woman, I'm not a Black woman, but as a woman, I'm hearing a lot of these things. It's like, oh, this makes perfect sense to me. It's expected. But what do you think is underneath that's not being named out loud?
Well, you know that even given all my disclaimers, the other thing is that I really do publicly or privately try to answer all questions honestly. Mm-hmm. That's sincere.
Yep.
I don't love everything I will say in giving an honest answer to this because I don't want to impugn anybody's motives. My honest response is it's because we do hear this a lot. It's not coincidental that when people say, I just don't like him, the main person that they generally say that about is Barack Obama. This is where this all needs like a massive disclaimer. So I am not a neoliberal. I have kind of extreme criticisms of neoliberalism. I feel like my politics are pretty radical. So in that regard, I could go for hours. I have endless critiques of the Democratic Party. There's a lot I could say about that. What makes it challenging in a moment like this, though, in particular, is that, and we saw this starting in 2008 when Barack Obama was running for the first time with all the birther stuff, which is
now is somehow coming back
around 2.0 and Kamala Harris. It's flagrant racism. It's overt. Now, I do think the right has had a way for a while, whether it's like kind of Hillary Clinton or it's Nancy Pelosi or whatever, of kind of cementing the stern, bitchy, bossy woman as a stereotype. Mm-hmm. But I do think in terms of the like, I just don't like her, that kind of the visceral dislike. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't think this is conscious, but there is a big machine that's stoking that, that is absolutely, and I'm going to say this the way that I feel it. The messaging is with Kamala Harris, as it was with Barack Obama, that this person is uppity, and you can insert the word after that. That's what the messaging is, but you can't say those words. Yep. They say everything but those words. Yep. And it's fair to critique policy. It's fair to not like a person's personality. I mean, I think it's been a little hilarious the way they've tried to pin her down, more like, oh, like her laugh is funny, her laugh is weird, and like all that kind of stuff. But they've not succeeded in branding her as a super villain, which is kind of what makes it a little bit more pronounced right now. Is it's sort of like, okay, if you think she's a lightweight, I do think her role in within the administration, as is true for a lot of vice presidents, frankly, typically vice presidents, the job is more ceremonial. It's not that big policy-wise. That's true for most vice presidents. But if you want to say she's a lightweight, like whatever, say all the things you want to say. But I do think the very visceral sort of like, well, I just don't like her. That is being stoked from somewhere. And I think the idea
also she should be grateful for where she's at.
That's right. Yeah.
And these, all of the terminology, these qualifications don't exist for white men, for someone like Trump with the double standard. It's just, we shouldn't even have to name those things. It's insane. But like the levels that women, Black women especially, like the hoops they have to jump through to be qualified, to not be labeled a DEI, right? It's just nonsense. Yeah. It reveals so many things that are under the surface.
Well, the DEI thing is maddening. I mean, I just think the every person that's ever picked on a political ticket represents a segment of the population that the person running for president does not. They represent states. They represent Trump picking Mike Pence needed someone who sort of represented Christian moralism and sort of a conservative, more traditional Republic. They always like, but the idea of like DEI for someone who's had the record that she is nonsensical. And again, I do think it's flagrantly racist. What is hard for someone like me, because for better or for worse, I do think I tend to. I don't think I'm doing magic here, but I do think I tend to try to read the room in terms of what are the currents that are happening beneath the thing? What's really being said? What is the message beneath the message? And I just think the messaging beneath the messaging in this particular context is so clear. And so it's really frustrating for me when it feels like it's considered not appropriate to name that. Yeah. When in reality, what they're saying and the way that they're saying it is couldn't be more clear, and they're leading with it. Yeah. It's not a peripheral feature; it's the defining feature. Right. The racism is not on the side; it's right down the middle. And every once in a while, it's then also Biden's not good at the border. Well, that's not out of bounds to say if that's how you feel, but it does feel like it's not at the periphery, but at the center, what are obviously electrically mythically, racially charged critiques that use every words except the words that you're not allowed to say on air. And then everybody's supposed to pretend like that's not what's happening. Yep. And it is absolutely what's happening.
Yeah.
And there's a spiritual energy to that, which I absolutely feel qualified to speak to. And I think anybody with any degree of discernment, and not just like in some sort of just within their communities, among their friends, should be able to speak to, should feel authorized to speak to.
And you see the way that even Trump in this interview with the Black journalists was so triggered by strong Black women holding him accountable in a room. Yeah. No, it doesn't matter that he bullies on a daily basis. You're not going to speak that way to me. You're not going to circumvent the niceties that I am that I am entitled to.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to focus on. Not the things that I've said, not the fact that I'm here asking for the Black vote in spite of the fact that I've said these things about the Black community. You as Black women are not going to do this to me because I am above this. Like, I just feel like that reveals so much. It's the same energy that's fueling so much of these things about Kamala, and why you can't really get to any real legitimate critique from people, because you can't get past that surface level thing that rubs them the wrong way, not just about her, but about women who speak with any sort of confidence, strength, especially Black women, about anything. Yeah. They circumvent, they're pushing against the powers that be, the structures. It's like this goes against everything that is America in their mind. Yeah. And they're very triggered by it. Yeah. And you can see the trigger happen in a room. And
with anybody, again, who's had any kind of a public record, I think it's always fair game to critique someone's public career. I'm not really hearing a lot of that. I feel like most of it is kind of standard listen
for it in conversation.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Get to it because they she slept her way to the top. Yeah. She's DEI. It's like all of these fabricated things that reveal so much of the heart of the thing. They're
still trying to figure it out. They're throwing, and I think it scrambles it a little bit, the fact that she was Attorney General, and that, for the left, the kind of tough on crime thing was a problem in 2020. So then it's kind of how they want to cast her. But as someone who does tend to think of, and I know a lot of folks and maybe people who are listening now don't agree with this, but as someone who does think that some of these issues around race are much more connected. I don't love Augustinian kind of original sin, but my closest version of that, I think, does have a lot more to do with race. I think especially here when we think about kind of founding mythologies, founding sin, I do think it's right there within the main arteries of American culture. So while Trump, and legitimately this can be where he's hard to pin down sometimes, is a pathological narcissist. So I think he can be triggered by a lot of things. Yeah. There does seem to be a way that he's uniquely triggered by people of color, because I do think there is a sense of kind of, but this has been my thing about Trump for years. I know I've written pieces about this that no one really read or paid attention to. And again, I'm not trying to act like I'm some kind of prophet, but I do think that I don't think Donald Trump is all that interesting as a human being. I think he's way more interesting as a projection and as a mirror of all these other things that exist, and all these, like, and it feels like that sometimes. I really don't mean this with hostility, that he feels like kind of a bag of air, where it's like this is a thin person that doesn't have much by way of ideology, politically or otherwise, but does seem, which I do think has been critical to his success, does seem to absorb something of the zeitgeist. It does seem to absorb something of what happens, like, culturally, and I think he reflects that back onto people. And I do think that's part of his instincts with the crowd. I think that's what makes him savvy sometimes, dangerous most of the time, And so, I think that's a lot of what we see happening right now, is that we're seeing a whole lot of what is America, the Childish Gambino song, "This Is America." That's what a lot of "This Is America" is really what we see in Trump, in ways that aren't really original, but that are uncomfortable to look at.
Yeah. It's crazy how whenever you see an interaction, even like this interview that went so awry, you don't only see things about the culture, about society. Yeah. You see like these interpersonal relationship dynamics.
Sure.
any woman who's been in an abusive relationship or a relationship with a narcissist, you see that dynamic happening. You know what I mean? It's all those factors just all the time. Like,
well, and more aptly, I think you see that stuff happening. Like, so, which I think it would be worth you speaking to, because I think a lot of that has been really illuminating to me. It's like I feel like you.
Well, but it was the thing that was there for so many women in before 2016. When the Access Hollywood tape is revealed and when he's speaking about women a certain way, like women who have experienced that sort of thing, we saw it up front. Like we knew exactly what we were getting. Yeah. The personality type. It's nothing novel. And we were sounding the alarm, warning people who didn't see those things. But and now the entire country has been subjected to that sort of abuse. And you see the chaos unfolding as a result of that. Just the way that it happens in relationships, the trauma that happens in relationships. Now we have an entire country traumatized by a narcissistic authoritarian personality.
Yeah.
And we're all reeling from that. And hopefully we don't have to be subjected to it for 4 more years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please. Okay. All right. Let's move on. I guess we do have to talk about JD for a minute. Just because you have been recording so many hilarious things about JD Vance. I don't even know if he's worth like fully like leaning into or exploring, because it seems like it's just such simplistic nonsense. If you want to know like the definition of weird, it would be anything that he says. Is there anything you want to say about that though? Because I mean, it's such a parody. Like it just seems like a SNL skit. Everything that he says, but you've been doing a lot of funny videos about that. So first of all, let's talk about him as a vice presidential pick. And how crazy that is.
Well, the video, JD just happened to fall in my lane in terms of
don't mess with a hillbilly.
I'm a unique hater of hillbilly elegy, and the whole concept behind it is that here's this guy from Ohio who went to Yale, who writes a book which maybe on its own terms, I'm not easy on the book, but if you want to be generous about it, because Vance himself has changed colors a lot kind of during his life and career. Short career at 39 and 18 months in the Senate. But, I think there has been such an impulse there of, here's somebody who attempts to, via an account of his relatives living in the North, seems to think he has some kind of understanding of the South that comes off like more like a reading of Southern tropes, more like the kinds of things you would see in movies about the South than it is about the South. And that in terms of the book turned film, though in fairness, the book and the film are different. I do think that they're through lines in this way. There's very much a sense of like a lot of, the people in the South are lazy. They're not willing to work hard. I was willing to do the work. I escaped. And a lot of othering of people from the South. But then who seems to want to sort of take that proximity to the geography of the South via, again, blood relation, I guess, to sort of claim to have kind of an inside scoop on white grievance that has now been channeled into, and this is why, we're against DEI initiatives and like all those kinds of things. So I just found all that to be so preposterous, and down to things that normally I would not say about somebody else, like in the sense that here's a person who's fairly slight, that I don't think projects this hyper alpha persona. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but clearly is like demonstrably wearing eyeliner all the time, but who then is like, seems to be sort of a very fragile, hyper right wing, near incel kind of masculinity thing going on. That just drives me out of my mind. And all the more for those of us who are from the South. And there's this idea that from the Rust Belt to Appalachia, this is supposed to be somebody who represents these like buried concerns. I think there is a real impulse for some of us of kind of like, yeah, you don't know nothing about us. you're not from where we're from, and like, and who the hell do you think you are to try to like it just. But and where maybe I don't mean to go further the question that maybe you'd have intended, where I've done a bit of a deep dive more recently and has been kind of interesting to me because, J.D. Vance apparently just converted to Catholicism within the past few years under the influence of Peter Thiel, the billionaire, tech guy, founded PayPal, Catholic, who is gay, which kind of interesting given J.D. Vance's stances within these culture wars, but just trying to parse out a little bit of kind of the very ambiguous political, ecclesial, spiritual identity that he has, or lack of identity. It's uniquely frustrating because it does feel like a person who doesn't have roots in any particular soil, who's just really striving to try to find it. And those of us who are from the South probably.
But it just shows the way that, and then this is the history of all authoritarians, of regimes. They know how to speak the language, and they hijack the imaginations of people that they have no concern about whatsoever. But they know how to speak the language, and they appeal to them. And that's what's so sad. It's like they're literally going to enact policies against. Stella's very upset because she thinks that we're upset
because we're animated.
She keeps. She keeps saying, we're okay.
We were just talking about J.D. Vance. We were just talking about Brother Vance.
They have no interest in really helping them.
Yeah.
They know how to speak the language.
Yeah. It feels cynical. It does feel cynical.
Yeah.
In a way, sure.
Yeah. And it makes you angry on behalf of the people who do buy into it and are voting for that.
Sure.
And what is this language? Like, what is this onslaught of language against childless people? Because you are not a biological father.
No.
But you are very much a father to our 4 kids.
Yeah.
And I am seeing so much nonsense. I mean, on all kinds of platforms from all different directions that I feel like this conversation's just injected this weird toxic thing. Like, if you don't have children, you're not, I mean, this was a Jordan Peterson thing today. Yeah. You cannot be a mature person.
Yeah.
You can't be fully mature. If you don't have children, you're not fully a person. You're like all of these projections onto people who don't have children. I can't speak to that. What does that make you feel like?
I don't know how well I can speak to it. I mean, I feel like it's, I guess it's hard for me to get past the extent to which it just feels like political suicide. It seems just so unnecessary to isolate that much of the electorate unnecessarily.
Also, they've pissed off the cat ladies, which...
Oh, yeah. You don't piss off the cat ladies. No, it's very... it just feels so desperately
some
insecure.
Of the smartest people I know are childless cat ladies. Like, you just...
Okay, so...
Not the ones to mess with.
So I'm trying, as a person who does try to live a life grounded in love and forgiveness and joy and broader things, I really am trying not to live out of bitterness, resentment, etc. What I will say, I take special exception to out of this, as a person who cares a lot about theology. Y'all, this is not just my riff. Christian Theology 101. Christian Theology 101 is that the story of God's family, it's part of what the beauty of the Christian story is, that it does not advance primarily through biology. I mean, even the very idea of Gentiles, which are most of the world, those who do not come directly through the lineage of Abraham, are grafted in. The idea that there is a family of God that is beyond blood, that is beyond biological family. It's the beauty of church, is that theoretically is that people are able to find each other and find a kind of spiritual home, though they don't have any kind of biological relationship to each other. I would say the thing that's so exceptional about the story of Scripture, from the Hebrew Scripture on to the New Testament, yes, of course, it's a family story in a way. It starts with Abraham. It starts with a particular man, the blessing on his family and on his people. But how expansive the story is, how it's always being furthered through the exceptions and through the outcasts and through people who wouldn't seem to have a proper kind of birthright to this story. And so, I just think the idea that, especially like in the name of some kind of Christianity and moralism and Christian values, that then that's somehow commandeered to be like, this is what the story is that people who have biological children like uniquely get it in a way that nobody else does. It's just flagrant bullshit. And I think people are right to kind of bow up that. But most of all, and I don't understand it as a political strategy. I understand like who you, except for the fact, I guess, if the idea is that you so want to rile up the base, people who think like, and the idea is like, hey, you and your kids, there are people out there who want to take them from you and take your way of life. I guess if something is like that fear-based. But yeah, it does seem to be, it does feel very small and very short-sighted. And I think whether you think about like Vance, who has a very short history in the Catholic Church, the uniqueness of Peter Thiel's own like family situation, all that, it's clearly all of this is just kind of politically advantageous. None of this is rooted in a tradition for him or a broader story. I don't think there's any, I don't think there's like any real theology to it. I think it is absolutely some kind of political calculus that I actually find pretty incomprehensible.
But they're trying to paint a picture of society as they see it, that it should be.
Yeah.
And it does appeal to a certain percentage of the population, but not the majority.
Yeah.
But they're banking on that majority.
Yeah.
Deciding elections.
Yeah.
And this is what they try to do through voter suppression.
Sure.
And through propaganda. This is the way that all regimes, authoritarian regimes, have gained traction in the past. It's never the majority.
Yeah.
It's just they paint a picture, they get enough people motivated, bought in, and that shapes the society. And that's the scary thing. It doesn't have to be the majority. And that's why you see things like voter suppression.
Absolutely.
They know if the majority rule, is realized, then they lose because it is a very small percentage. I mean, not very small. I mean, it's maybe 30% of the population.
Sure.
Which is a scary percentage.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's the ones they're speaking to.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to see them hold fast to that.
Right.
Even as they're committing what we see as political suicide.
Yeah.
They're doubling down.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the joy. Oh, no, it's just Ashlyn. It's all right. The hopefulness, the joy that we're experiencing right now with Kamala, with there's it's fine. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine.
That's just some.
It's just Ashlyn.
Mm-hmm.
Just Ashlyn. You want to go get her? Go get her.
You can go get
her. Do you think that this joy is, I think Sean Hannity called it a temporary like sugar high from the left that we're experiencing with Kamala. And I even like late on Threads, we've been experiencing this Oklahoma blue dot, like all of we live in Oklahoma. There are very few blue dots. But we've been finding each other and talking about, how many of us exist. And it's just been a joyful, hopeful thing. And it feels like hope and joy is so rare. And when you find it, when there's reasons to hold on to it, you do, you know what I mean? Almost irrationally, you're just like, I need to hope. I need to have this joy. But also you don't want to be, naive about the things that are facing us and the road ahead. So can you speak to that? Like the hope and the joy that we have versus the uphill battle that we face?
Well, again, as a person who has all kind of critiques of neoliberalism and therefore the Democratic Party, I think where a lot of this lands for me, one, I think that there has been such a deep disillusionment and such deep disenchantment that I think probably has been underestimated of just how discouraged people felt about Trump and Biden as at the top of that ticket. I think the idea of like these two elderly, octogenarian, whatever, like white men, I think just simply, I think having someone younger, I think having someone that does represent something of a different kind of diversity within America, I think all that feels very different. But, I think that where I'd want to go more broadly is that because I think especially when this was still Trump versus Biden, everything had become a referendum on Biden's age. And so then when like Trump and Trumpism is still kind of at the foreground of so many things, then I think then what you have is, and I feel like you're better to speak to this with the deep dive you've been doing on all things fascism, historically and otherwise. the disinformation is everything. And one of the things I know I struggle with the most in kind of a Christian context for people from more evangelical and Pentecostal settings is even if they haven't completely, been drinking the Kool-Aid, even if they're not kind of all the way like sort of Trump cult believe that he's some kind of messianic figure prophesied in scripture and all that, is that the seeds of disinformation, run so deep at this point that it just sows a lot of chaos, and that people then the expectations become apocalyptic, and those sort of prophecies become self-fulfilling. Is that people kind of, they're expecting chaos. That's what they're speaking. And so a lot of what I think is happening right now is, for the first time in a minute, people feel like they've got permission to not operate according to that kind of script. And there's a little more of a sense of, well, what if people actually do still have permission to dream out loud about the world they want to live in? And what if they do get to articulate that? What if there can be a future? Because that's something I found interesting too, is that, I grew up in in a Pentecostal church context, but that it had adapted a lot of kind of fundamentalist dispensationalist theology where, there is a lot of apocalyptic end of the world, only to discover later in my life that, hey, people more like on the left are equally apocalyptic. It's more like, instead of God burning up the world, we are. So, but one way or the other, it's going to end. And it's all heading towards like a bloody, awful, oh, well, maybe we just have one way or the other, we got a few more years here. And I think like, it's just the thing that I find pretty beautiful and heartening about the moment right now is I think people are actually giving themselves permission again for the moment to dream about, hey, what if we actually still get to choose our own adventure here? And what if it is still possible to create a different kind of future and not just passively accept some kind of script that's been assigned to us, which is what I think had the Biden-Trump race had come to represent for a lot of people. So is that sustainable? I think like yes and no. I mean, there are always going to be ebbs and flows for this kind of thing historically. Of course, I don't think it's contingent on a party or a personality or anything like that. But I can just say it's good to kind of feel that in the water. It's really wonderful, especially like in our house, that our own kids are just energized and engaged. They get overwhelmed sometimes, of course, but they're also energized and engaged in a way I think we just haven't seen in a while, because there's at least some kind of a gesture towards the notion that maybe their participation in the world they want to create or in democracy might mean something. And I feel like a lot of the messaging that people have got from different quarters for a while has been, your voice doesn't matter no matter what you do. This is still where the story's going. Is that fair?
Yeah. And there's also a feeling that like hope, energy, joy is something that you cannot lean into because it is still a two-party system and both parties still have corruption.
Yeah, that's sure.
There is still Gaza, and we are still seeing dead and maimed babies.
That's right. Yeah.
Every day. And for, I mean, so long for me, it was just like, I don't know if I can vote because these things are happening in real time. There's now 40,000 plus dead Palestinians, and they're saying 185,000 plus due to other disease. And how are we excited about anything? When that is happening, if we truly do identify with these people and we see those babies as our own. And it has felt so hard to lean into any hope.
Absolutely.
Or joy about any American system.
And the way, by the way, that I frame this sometimes and I have just friends in my life who've asked me these kind of questions lately. I don't know if this would be helpful for anybody now and that almost feels like a separate conversation just because it has so much weight to it, talk about what's happening to Gaza and talk about our connections with Palestinian Christians. But it's like the horror of that and the ways that there are so many ways that in terms of what really matters, Republicans and Democrats have looked a whole lot less different than we might imagine. There's so much to be said about the corporate structure of both parties. It can feel like NASCAR. It can feel like everybody's kind of wearing a different corporate sponsorship. And there's, oh goodness, I mean, there's just so much that to be spoken to there. And yet, I do think the imminent threat, and that's the language I've been using a lot lately, even with people close to me, the imminent threat of fascism is so much greater than anything else.
Yeah.
And that's not equivalent. It's actually not equivalent.
Right.
And I mean, like, it's not like flat-footed not.
Because once that thing takes over,
no, that's right.
It's the end of the end.
Yeah.
There's no hope that those things can be made better or mitigated.
Not the end of the end of it. And God is people who believe that God who engineers life out of death.
Society.
But yes. In terms of like of a social order, the social construct that we have. Yeah, I think it's like if that takes over, and I think that's what the impulse behind, I think people don't realize sometimes how intentional all this is that the amount of disinformation, because I actually think more people that I know than not, they wouldn't say so much that they believe in all kinds of conspiratorial things. And we know people, of course, who are very much on the QAnon kind of train and all that. Most people we know would not. What most people that we would know would say is that, well, I just don't know what to think.
Yeah.
I just don't know what to think. Yeah. Because...
Which is the history of fascist
there
regime.
It is.
That's their goal. They try to flood with so much propaganda, so many confusing things, so many lies that people feel disoriented and they don't know who the elite is versus who they aren't. And so they get confused, so they give up and they check out.
That's
and then they succumb to whatever.
There is no such thing as science.
Right.
There is no such thing as history.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as facts.
Anything that's factual has to be labeled as conspiracy.
It's a post-fact context where then, and inevitably then what happens is you can be disoriented. You can simply be uncertain. But then what happens in that chaos when the dust is not yet settled is that people will gravitate towards the strongest voice.
Yes.
Whoever speaks the loudest.
Because they want someone to come in and cut through the confusion and chaos. And so whoever speaks the loudest, the most authoritatively is who they're going to listen to.
And I feel like you've got more insight into this than I do in terms of like how that works.
Well, that's part of what we wanted to get to, which this might not be like the most fun, like podcast content.
I'm having fun. You're having fun. I'm having fun.
I did want to get into like literally like a list of things because I've been reading a lot. I don't know if you see any of these books back here, but the history of fascist regimes, authoritarianism. And there are, I mean, if you look at Umberto Eco's 14 points of fascism is not something that you can identify as like, it always looks this way every time. It's different in different times with different societies, but there are certain commonalities. And so if you look at all of those, in the current moment that we're in, I'm going to read some of them.
Please, yeah.
And then you can comment on them because I feel like we're already talking about some of them. All right. So we've got one, culture tradition. So no new learning is valid. It's very anti-science. Any change is demonized and avoided. All truth is back there. Any new truth that's discovered is, it must be interpreted by the truth back there and it's a threat to it.
Can I give my quick theological riff on that?
Yes.
Is that because I like to talk about this a lot? Is that one of the things I find so significant about the way I think any good theology is oriented? Keep in mind, Christians have been praying for 2,000 years, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's fundamentally future oriented. It's fundamentally eschatological. And the moment that religion ever becomes located in glory days, it's about recapturing something from the past. It becomes dangerous. It becomes fundamentalist. It becomes authoritarian. Those same instincts. I think that, and I find this to be, and it's interesting that that's true politically because I've always come at this theologically, is that if people have glory days, if they have a moment in the past they want to recapture, inevitably that's not going somewhere good. I have never seen anything beautiful come out of anything, theologically speaking, that's not been oriented towards the future. But if you can't envision, I mean, it's the same thing that we talk about like with depression and stuff. If you can't imagine a future, if you literally can't, if you can't envision a healthy, like constructive future, you're not going to be a healthy person.
Right.
But so if the best that you've got is there is some mythical moment way back then when everything was great that you're trying to get back to, which inevitably is going to be through rose-colored glasses, then not only, I mean, the most conspicuous feature of that, of course, is going to be whatever that moment was that was so great for you was probably not great for somebody else.
Right.
But beyond that, I think it really is just kind of a mental trap that because it doesn't really exist in time. There is a mythology to it. And yeah, so anyway, it does just interest me from a theological perspective, how true that is, that if people get stuck in trying to get back to a magic moment, then, you don't go anywhere.
And it's why you see things like CRT and DEI be so threatening and have to be demonized so immediately, even though these benefit a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because those are forward-thinking things. Those are making the past right. And you cannot look to the past and own the flaws, the missteps, the mistakes, because that would be messing with the mythological history that we did everything right.
Yeah.
And then your identity is in question.
And evangelicalism plays into this easily because we often tend to be kind of an ahistorical people. We don't come from a particular people, from a particular place. It's just us in the Bible making this up as we go. So when you don't have a concrete sense of tradition to tether you to something, which is not altogether bad, but it's like tradition does give you kind of a sense of guardrails. And this would probably be another conversation for another time. But even when you bring up like DEI and all that, it's just one of the things that I hate to hear in all that is I just feel like that those things just become defined really monolithically, that really are much more about how do we make sure that everybody around us is able to flourish, but they get pigeonholed into being, I don't know, something where I have to lose in order for somebody else to win. And there's a scarcity kind of mentality to it. And really, and I do think it's theological, there's a scarcity theology to it, that's kind of at the center of it. But this is great. Please keep going.
And even when you talk about like the church and Christians, this weird sort of like defensive protectionism that if we own our own failures, somehow that's projecting failure into the world, or like illegitimacy, when it's the thing that would make us more credible.
Well, my riff here, one of the reasons I so love the Christian practice of confession and find it to be so important. And this is not a knock, but for those of us who are from more like non-denominational settings, I do think it's one of the weaknesses of that is that when you're not from a particular tradition, one of the things I've always loved about the idea of confession is that if you identify as a Christian with any particular Christian tradition, all Christian tradition has its own skeletons in the closet. So you kind of have to start from a posture of confession, because there are things, within every strand. There are things within every, just every expression of Christian tradition that are not great, and you have to own that. But when you're not a particular people that come from a particular place with a particular history, then you don't have to own any particular kind of baggage. Whereas ideally, I think it's much better that we have to start from a posture of humility, which a lot of us just don't, if we don't consider ourselves to be tethered to any particular history somewhere.
It made me think of this. I just looked this up because this is an anniversary of James Baldwin today. And I love this quote from him. "I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." Yeah. And I feel like anyone who loves something has to have the ability to critique it. Yeah. Because that's the only way that it continues and it retains any sort of integrity. So, all right. Next one, anti-intellectualism. Attacks on modern culture and science. I find this to be hilarious because this is something I've just recently learned. Newspeak, which is using impoverished vocabulary to limit critical thinking and appeal to the masses of people. So I remember when Trump would misspell words in tweets, when he would say things that were just, not proper spelling or vocabulary. This is an intentional thing. Like this is a strategy. Disdain for the arts, capitalizing on the ignorant and fearful, disdain for critical thinking and reading, banning books, words. That's pervasive right now. Yeah. If we talk about Oklahoma and Ryan Walters and the stuff going on here, because everyone in America has heard about Ryan Walters. This is the guy here trying to mandate the Bible being taught in schools and banning books everywhere. And we're in the thick of all of that. But this is not anything new. Yeah. This is a strategy that's been used. And all of these things are not new. These are from Mussolini, the originator of fascism. So you're talking about the early 1900s until today. So these are these are strategies and tactics that have been used from the beginning of the thing.
And the strangest of this for me is that when you have people socialized to come to believe that even as an overwhelming majority, they are somehow a persecuted minority, that's what makes all this possible. Because like how much of my life as a person is a white, straight Christian guy who has always been able to practice my faith really freely. How much messaging have I heard that other people want to take that freedom away? You're the persecuted one, whatever. And when people have internalized that deeply enough, that's what's so wild about like living in Oklahoma right now, where people are trying to like mandate that all public school teachers, regardless of their own faith, regardless of their own orientation towards faith, are supposed to teach the Bible and teach scripture. What would that even mean if you don't have theological training in some way? But it's interesting how it comes out of that out of this kind of vague sense that you're the one who's really persecuted, that then comes actual persecution, that you are now entitled in some way to actually project your life, to project your beliefs onto others. I'm just, I never just get beyond.
Well, and the crazy thing is, not to go on a rabbit hole about Oklahoma, but our school system has never been great. But under Democratic Governor Brad Henry, we were 17th. And then as soon as Mary Fallon and Republicans take over, we dropped to 49th, and we've been there. And so now we have a Secretary of Education, we have a governor who are so hyper-focused on these meaningless culture war issues and not focusing on anything that would actually change that statistic.
Well, that seem to want to prove that government does not work. Right.
So, and they're putting all the resources in private schools, which we could say a lot about that because our kids were there with the governor's kids and under all of that. But that's a different conversation. And the kids are suffering, and we remain at 49th while people focus on non-issues at the expense of our kids. But we could say so much about anti-intellectualism because I feel like if you try to get into these conversations with people, it's like, oh, you read too much. You know what I mean? Like this, do you hear that a lot? I hear that a lot.
Well, yeah. And it's funny because even like when you were raising like the JD Vance stuff, I don't mean to be like all like, hey y'all, but like really, I always talk about being a hillbilly Pentecostal. I think like my way of being in the world is so much more in terms of where I come from. It is much more intuitive. It is much more emotional. There's place for wildness and dancing the spirit and soul and like all things. So it's like, but it's where it really doesn't work on me when people try to do like the anti-intellectual thing. It's like, no, like I'm the last person. We're definitely not going to be the people who want people to be, in ivory towers studying their, really the opposite of that. But it's what's so weird is that when you somehow, and of course, what's also frustrating is the people who are talking about this really don't believe that either. It's that their own sort of, the dissonance between them and the people that they ostensibly serve in that regard. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of like talking down. It's very condescending to like act like the people can't understand or, can't understand the arts and can't understand books and can't be tapped into these, broader currents that are really important. I just found all that to be deeply insulting for people in the South or people in the heartland places like Oklahoma.
But people start to become suspicious of experts.
Yeah.
Because that is what the people in power want them to be.
Yeah.
Suspicious of experts. So they can co-opt, they can come in and they can create whatever narratives. And so people, they get their education through Facebook posts and memes and things that take no effort from people to create and put out on the internet.
Because the messaging ultimately is listen to me.
Right.
Don't listen to the experts, listen to me.
Yeah.
So it's not that there aren't experts. It's just that we, the people who are sowing the disinformation, are the experts, but they're not. But there is no longer there's not a 60 Minutes. There's not a newspaper.
Right.
They're not shared sources of authority.
Yep.
That would have even sort of an ostensible kind of authority to it. It's more like no, just the point is just listen to us.
Yeah. And people don't engage with any sort of long form content.
That's right.
Anything to where people have put blood, sweat, and tears into researching.
Yeah.
They've put their life on the line to, journalists and things like that. They're listening to things that have cost people nothing to put out to the internet. And they ignore the people who have put something on the line to put information out.
Yeah.
And so that reversal, and I know a lot of that social media and things that people are just so seduced by that don't even realize. But just our media literacy is such a thing. Just the fact that people can't, not just books, but they cannot engage in long form content of any sort now. If it's not in a 2-sentence meme or video, it can't be true. So, all right. Next thing, and this one will get me hot, and we could stay here for a long time, but we probably shouldn't. The way that every authoritarian regime goes straight for religious groups because they are the easiest ones to co-opt and manipulate for their purposes. And I have this weird dream and vision of this generation of Christians, of Jesus followers who are not that, who are not easily co-opted by empire, by proximity to power, who stay about the thing. But history shows us that's never been the case. This is a question I have. I don't have any easy answers for it. I don't think it makes us look good. I'm still a Christian. And so I want to believe that we can be that, but we never have been. And you see someone like Trump who has never, I mean, he calls him, I don't want to unchristianize anyone, but he doesn't seem to hold to any Christian ideals in any sort of way. You see Elon Musk right now tweeting to Christians. This guy's not a Christian, but they know that this is the population they can co-opt. And so that's been something that's done. From Mussolini was an atheist, but he went straight for the religious because he knew he could get them on their side. And that's been, And so we'll just, do you want to say anything about that, or should we just move on?
The only thing I would say is that, while I'm not trying to protect Christians or Christianity from any flaws that are intrinsic to the system, is that, famously, when we think about in the 3rd century, Constantine coming to power, Roman emperor who claims to see a sign of a cross in the sky, and hears a voice that says, by this sign I will conquer. And suddenly, now the Roman Empire is going to become Christian. And it becomes, the truth is, for all the things we can say about that, I think that the fact is, not just inside of religion, but outside of religion, most people are drawn towards a fairly spiritual kind of ordering of the world around power and wealth and influence. And whether or not they give that religious language or not, they're pretty susceptible to who's in charge, who has the money, who has the influence, who has the capital, how are they leveraging that capital in any particular moment or time. So in that regard, I don't know that I really think that Christians are that much more vulnerable than anybody else, but I do think it makes a lot of sense as to why fascists strategically go right for them, because I think systemically, religious people are postured theoretically to be pockets of resistance, and I think if you can pull those folks along, then you've done. Then you have real loyalists. Then you've done the hard work. But I don't know that really, as much, and I get as disillusioned as anybody else, but that religious people are that much more susceptible to that sort of spirituality of influence, really, as most other people are. I think at the end of the day, that's kind of how the world runs in general, unfortunately, for people who don't really intentionally choose to live a different way. But when they start using religious language, then people, their ear is attuned to that. And that's I think this person is on my side. And it doesn't matter, the cronyism, it doesn't matter the criminality, it doesn't matter the integrity. It's like, oh, this person's on our side. Yes. And so they will abandon everything that they believe to side with that. Because it is speaking their language. That's right. And it's much more powerful. Yes. And people in power know that. And they know if they say the right words. Trump knows that if he sells this Bible with the Constitution in it, and he says all sorts of Christian things that he kind of mumbles through, that people are going to be like, oh, well, he's one of us. Yeah, the proximity to beauty and truth makes all of that far more toxic than it could have been. And what you've said a great thing about this before, that it's always it's the appearance of the thing. Yes. What is it that you said about that? Well, it's just the appearance over the reality. It's more like the image over the substance. And I do think a lot of Christians in particular, unfortunately, in North America, white evangelicals in particular, have not been trained necessarily to make that distinction, because we tend to like bright, shiny things, and not necessarily, to see that distinction that theoretically I'd want to think Christians would be able to kind of to sniff that out, but sometimes they're not.
And I feel, not to like derail from this, but I feel like so much of the conversation, even this past week with the Olympic stuff, the opening ceremony, this, what was her name? Now I can't think of it. The boxer, like all of these things that hijack our imaginations. It's like, because we want the appearance of the thing to be the thing, and we will be outraged, and we'll like break our rules of posting about politics on social media for these things, like these symbols, but the real injustices, the systemic things, we'll ignore the 40,000 dead Palestinians and these children, but we will be all about this appearance of the thing. I feel like it over and over, it just reveals the heart of it, of the thing, like where we've gone, like we've lost the plot.
People are chess pieces, and we, especially if we're experiencing some kind of ambiguity about our own lives, if we're experiencing a sense of loss of control, if we're experiencing our own feelings of powerlessness, we're able to project that by being hyper confident and hyper certain about these other situations that really we might not be all that informed about. And that's what makes those things especially gross to watch, is that at a certain point it just becomes really conspicuous that the thing that's being talked about is not really the thing. That really is what's happening, is that people are frightened and insecure, and they don't feel grounded. They don't feel tethered to something larger than themselves. And in an attempt to try to find that kind of grounding, they just dump all of their stuff onto these people that they do not know. And oftentimes people who are either vulnerable or just so not connected to any of these realities in some way. But we need an outlet. And so these things become, these tensions become heightened, and these stories become near allegorical, because we need them to become almost mythic ways that we're able to work out our own angst.
If we can rage about the Olympic opening ceremony, that costs us nothing.
Yeah.
But that same week, the same couple days, Sonia Massey, this Black woman, is killed by a police officer in her home for no reason, and nobody talks about it. Nobody will talk about it. Nobody acknowledges it. This is not a thing, because then we have to talk about systemic injustice and police brutality in America, and we have to own that shit. We don't have to own anything. Like, if we can project all of that out there onto other people, and they're unrighteous, and then we're off the hook. We're righteous. That is, I've just been enraged this week about the things that people are outraged about versus the things that they're not, because they're outraged about the things that cost them nothing.
Well, there are a whole lot of negative things that can be said about, and probably should be said about, Christianity with regards to Christian tradition. But one of the things I love about the Christian story theoretically is that the whole idea of a God in Jesus who's embodied, who is flesh and blood, is that this is not a world in which symbols and metaphors and allegory and symbols have ultimate meaning. Bodies have ultimate meaning. And that's what's so always wrenching and maddening for me to watch about these kinds of things, is that people, and it's why I don't think what you're doing here is simply like whataboutism or whatever. It's like, it's like the premium that people place on symbols that are relatively empty. What kind of a God do you think you have? Do you really think a God who's up there that's kind of like, I tell you what, that ceremony was just out of bounds.
I'm offended by that.
Bring me and what would God want exactly? The emphasis on kind of pomp and circumstance, again, on appearance, over the reality of what real people are dealing with in the world, is, on a philosophical level, is absurd. And I think, again, theoretically, Christians should be better at seeing this than anybody else, but in reality turn out to often be the worst, and easily co-opted into like this, all of this stuff around like fairly empty symbols and that have much more to do with like ceremony and I'll stop. But
well, it reminds me, I mean, I used to lead worship, and I still to this day, one of the lines that never escapes me is, I think it's Hillsong, break my heart for what breaks yours. How many churches sing that? How many churches still sing that on Sunday morning? What do you think breaks the heart of God? Is it some ceremony that, you know what I mean, like didn't get it right? Or is it the image of God being murdered unjustly? Is it injustice? Like, this is what our Bible shows us. Clearly what breaks the heart of God. Okay. I'm going to run through these quickly, and then we can riff on them.
It's great.
Obsession with defining national identity by who enemies are. Disagreement is treason. So back to anti-intellectualism, we devalue intellectual discourse and critical reasoning as barriers to action out of fear that such analysis will expose contradictions embodied in a synchronistic faith. Vilify and discredit journalists and media. Truth can only come from the leader, and improved media outlets and loyal talking heads. Protest is labeled as treason. Protesters are subject to imprisonment and even death. We've seen that ramp up. Fear of difference. Appeals against foreigners and immigrants. Diversity is polluting our blood, culture, way of life. Homogeneity is protected at all costs. Obsession with a plot. Hyping up of an enemy threat, often appealing to xenophobia, with the fear of disloyalty and sabotage from marginalized groups living within the society. Everyone is educated to become a hero, and so disciples must feel they are under siege at all times. Life is for struggle and war, and passive is for the weak. They have an Armageddon complex, so crisis always has to be manufactured so people have a reason to fight against someone or something, and hero complexes can be maintained. Life is permanent warfare. Therefore, there must always be an enemy to fight. Machismo. We could talk about that for a long time. Disdain for women, intolerant. And this is something that I have found so enlightening, how far back this goes, this intolerance and condemnation of any sort of sexuality that does not fit the norm. This goes back to early 1900s. Homosexuality, contempt for LGBTQ, gender roles, women, the weak, which also goes right hand in hand with sexual exploitation and sexism from the people who are condemning these other things. So those always go right. Those go right hand in hand. Populism, where the leader holds himself as the interpreter of the popular will. Delegitimizing of democratic institutions. Anti-environmentalism. Politicizing and delegitimizing court systems, packing the courts, calling for the removal of term limits. Guys, these are not new things. These are things that I have pulled from books from the last 100 years. This is not about Project 2025 or MAGA, even though it sounds like it is, which is the point I'm trying to make. Blaming current issues on predecessors, obsessions with weapons and national security, consolidation of power, elimination and discreditation of oversight agencies and any systems of checks and balances. Convincing the masses that only they can oppose the rotten agencies. Issue executive orders that bypass the government. And when you can't do that, you get rid of those branches of government. And if you've not read Project 2025, that's exactly what is spelled out. Voter suppression, we all know that. Co-opting of conservative elites by promising favors, corporate powers. Obsession with symbols, insignia, flags. Claiming to represent patriotism, but only in service of the regime, not the people. Labor union suppressed, frames democracy as the real tyranny, and fascist ideals as freedom. And we could go on to strongman personality types, with obsession with crowd sizes and the narcissism and amassing loyalists and all these things, rampant cronyism. A lot of them come into power because there is rampant crime and corruption, and they're trying to cover that up. And so then they have to spin things. Chronic lying, projection, bullying. I mean, go on and on. But that's what is scaring me right now. Is reading these things that are not, they were not written by people on any side of the political aisle. They were not written about America. They were not written about Trump. They were not written about MAGA. And we are seeing these things, and not just one of them. that is supposed to be in the mix for these things to take root. But we are seeing every single one of these things happening before our eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so here's what I want to talk about. So we see two things all the time. One is real disciples of Jesus do not engage these things.
Mm.
And if you're really a disciple, you don't put your faith in any sort of political system.
Sure.
You don't engage these things because we're living in some realm that is outside of this.
Yeah.
Then we see Christian nationalists who are coming in and co-opting all of these things to create the world as they see it.
Mm.
And so they're using it on the opposite ends of the spectrum. So my question for you is, how do we, as followers of Jesus, who his kingdom, he said, is not of this world, but yet we are in this world. And we are trying to bring those kingdom realities to bear, but not in ways that nationalists would use, that are coercive, that are about power, that are about, all these things. So how do we balance those things? How do we remain grounded and also engaged? And can you critique both ditches?
Wow. That's a big question. I think, well, I would just say this. So I'm wearing one of my rosaries tonight. This is not product placement. I don't have a deal with anybody. I would take her money. I don't know. But Rugged Rosaries makes these beautiful rosaries I like a lot. And I've laughed a little bit because I have a couple of these now, as you know, that I like to wear. And I remember when I was a kid, I remember heard this, but it's kind of the water movement that I knew, that they said that that the reason that Catholics wore crucifixes or rosaries is because they didn't believe in the resurrection, that Jesus was still at the cross. Well, spoiler alert. Catholics do, in fact, believe in the resurrection. I'm not a Catholic Christian, but Catholics do believe in the resurrection. And I find a lot of beauty in these. But one of the reasons I love to wear these so much is that actually it's not a way of minimizing the resurrection, of course. But, Paul, of all people in the New Testament, put so much weight down on this idea that the power of the Christian gospel is located in the cross, that it's on the cross that Jesus overcomes principalities and powers, that it's on the cross that Jesus overcomes the forces of death, that it's specifically in the sacrifice of Jesus. We see in the language, even the apocalyptic language of Revelation, that it's Jesus' sacrifice on the cross that overcomes. Now, there's a way in which, of course, I think kind of in the eyes of the world, that could seem like some sort of weird fetishization of, naked man dying on a tree. That'd be very strange. But I would think for people that actually do believe that the power of God and the power of the kingdom, or the kingdom of God, is located in the cross, these ideas that you've been talking about, this is the stuff that should seem really strange. This is stuff that should seem really
the core motivations are antithetical to the way of Jesus.
Absolutely. Because all about
power,
yes,
lust for revenge,
yes,
and trying to retain some sort of national identity based on who's in and who's out.
Yes.
These are all things that are anti-Christ.
Absolutely.
Really.
Absolutely. And they're all about seizing power. Yes. Whereas the way of the cross, and Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and life. There is a way of Jesus. And this way is a way of self-sacrifice. It's a way of self-denial. It's a way of self-sacrifice. It's a way of self-giving love. And so it doesn't look anything like this. And I think the challenge for Christians now is that in the world that we live in, and I really get this because, and I thought this sounds like a drive-by disclaimer, and I mean it much more strenuously than that. It is absolutely true that the gospel of Jesus, the power of Jesus, we're not going to get at any of these things through human political systems. I absolutely do believe that. I think there is something really transcendent about these ideas that are important. But also, we live in the world, and Jesus was embodied in the world. And I think right now, to return to my language of imminent threat, I think some of these systems, I think some of these principalities and powers pose such an imminent threat Yes, to us, but I think more importantly to our vulnerable neighbors. And that's the thing where if I'd most very gently want to check some even pastors and church leaders out there who understandably want to maintain a certain kind of neutrality. I'm not talking about saying who you're going to vote for. I'm not talking about party loyalties here. But I do think at this particular moment in time, when there's a lot of stuff that's overt and explicit around race, a lot of things that where the stakes are higher for the more vulnerable people among us, I think that does become a different kind of conversation in terms of where we stand and how we stand. And I don't like this. I don't like this more than anybody else because I am not immune to the pull towards power. Why would I not want to write The Purpose-Driven Life? Why would I not want to pastor a megachurch? Why would I not want to have maximum influence? You don't get anywhere like talking this way. It doesn't. But I'm so, and I don't say it like as a martyr or something. It's just, but I'm aware that the way of Jesus, I'm just so convinced at this point when Jesus talks about the narrow way versus the wide path that leads to destruction. Doesn't say hell, it talks about destruction. I think the narrow path looks a lot more like this because I think this is what it looks like right now in the moment that we're in. To deny our own self-interest is to name some of these things, is to resist some of these realities. And again, I certainly don't think that's as simple as, voting in the opposite direction. But I do think sometimes, because I think a lot of these dynamics are very spiritual, it does involve naming some of these things. I think it does involve getting involved within our own communities in the ways that we can. And because I do think there should be a way that there should be more consensus than there is, especially when we as people of faith see the language of our faith being co-opted. That's the thing that I find to be especially wicked. I've had this conversation. I'll just say it quite this very really bluntly for people right here. Part of the reason that I can get fairly chippy about, and I've been writing about these things for a long time and going back to, some of the stuff I started publishing around 2015, 2016 and all that on the internet. The messianic stuff that people project onto Trump in particular, nobody in my life has ever done that with Hillary Clinton or with Joe Biden or with Kamala Harris. I'm not saying that people might not put too much weight or emphasis, but I've never heard a person talk about Joe Biden as a messiah. I've never heard a person.
Someone post a meme just in parody about Kamala this week, and I was like, "Oh no, we're going to get our people if they do that because we're not doing that."
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like we're not wearing the stuff. We're not covering our cars with the stuff. Like we're not, these people are not the saviors of the world.
No, but obviously we don't. Right. Of course I don't. Of course I don't, because I would never think something like that. It wouldn't cross my mind. I would think that's an insane thing to think, much less to say. And I said this to somebody tonight who felt like they were given kind of a hard time. I'm like, well, if I vote for Trump, I feel like people are so like, whatever. Who are you talking about? Well, this one person said something. I was like, okay. If I'm very rarely on Facebook, but if, because I have ADHD and I get confused between my Facebook page and my public Facebook page. It's all a jumble to me. But I do know this. If I go on any particular moment right now, I know I'd still be connected to hundreds of people who've posted in the last few days who absolutely have some kind of, if not, I'm using the phrase messianic, but they would use language of like King Cyrus, from Daniel and like all that. From the Old Testament, there'd be this whole narrative around some version of like Trump is God's man. I don't know a person in my life who's doing that the other direction. So is there more heat on the throw when I talk about this, when I talk about the other? Hell to the yes, because I don't know any Christians who think that anybody in the Democratic Party brings some sort of salvific hope. No one is expecting any sort of eschatological realities to come to bear because of voting for that. Yeah. But it's precisely because Christians then do that, and it's actually relatively mainstream, that I feel the need, because we all have to kind of come for our own people, right? Within our own families, within our own social structures. What can we do if we don't speak to our own? Well, of course, I'm going to feel strongly about that. Not because I'm a deeply convicted Democrat, because to me, that would be that would be just stupid. That'd be asinine. Again, I could go for days in terms of my critiques of the Democratic Party, but I do think, especially when the language of faith is brought into this, the ways that it is, the witness of the church is at stake in some pretty critical ways. And I'll say this for some of y'all, because I get it, and I'm not trying to get too preachy right here. I know that the stakes can feel high in terms of relationships, and especially people who are involved in like church infrastructure systems. Like I totally get it that there's a cost involved with these kind of things. I think it's worth zooming out sometimes 30,000 feet in terms of like what this looks like even 5 years from now. I actually do. I'm not trying to. Everybody thinks that the moment that they're in is important, and I think that can be narcissistic and all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, I do think there is a certain kind of weight to the moment that we're in, and I think like where you stand and how, in terms of like for our kids, for our daughters, for our brothers, for our sisters, for our vulnerable friends. Yeah. I think that matters.
And I've had this 180 lately about patriotism, because I feel like I had this bad taste in my mouth because the way the word, like, like patriot, what a patriot is, has been co-opted, and it means the symbols. It means the, like the idea of the thing, when what we see doesn't fit the reality of our ideals. And whether it's fighting for your family and being authentic in relationships, the people who you're showing up for, whether it's Christianity and the faith that you're fighting for and the systems that you work within and the country that you're in, like telling the truth about it is the most patriotic thing there is. Engaging, not disengaging and just saying, oh, well, this is the thing that it's supposed to be. And so, you know what I mean? So like, peace out. And anyone who's saying anything critical, you know what I mean? Like, you're just a naysayer, you're trying to tear it down. Like, no, like people who are in the fray advocating for the thing are the most patriotic. These are the people who care the most. But I think the way we go about it is what we need to have more conversations about. Absolutely. And this is what I want to hear people talk about. Not, the true disciples don't engage, or the Christian nationalists who were like, oh, integrity doesn't matter because we're just trying to take power. No, the way we're going about it and the motivations matter. And we need to have those conversations.
Well, I'm really not, I'm the smart guy here, but this is a critique I have that I do think is a little unique to me. I think a lot of people draw a really direct line between the moral majority as conceived by Jerry Falwell Sr. and Pat Robertson et al. To what we have now in a way that I don't quite see like that. There are some strands to be sure, but I think a lot of what happened is that when we think about, I don't know, Bill Hybels, Willow Creek, Saddleback, the rise of the megachurch movement, I feel like that era starts roughly mid to late 70s, around the same time as the moral majority. But what happens kind of in those spaces is that faith becomes so important to get people to we just want people to believe in Jesus. We want them to say the prayer. And the idea becomes, it doesn't really matter what you think or what you do about anything else, so long as you pray the prayer. So the idea is to make church as neutral as possible, remove religious symbols, even remove crosses, all of that. And so I actually think the moment that we're in now is less a product of like a direct line to the moral majority and more an extension of, we had a whole lot of years of ambiguity where the idea was like, oh, well, so long as you believe in Jesus, what you think about anything else that happens in the world really doesn't matter. And it was in that vacuum that these authoritarian voices that had an agenda, like asserted the kind of influence that they do. And I think that's how we got here. It was not, it's a radically depoliticized, apolitical, ahistorical faith that gets us here, much more so than this is something that comes out of Jerry Falwell Sr. and the moral majority. So I think it actually can't be overstated just how dangerous that vision of faith is. Being a Christian has everything to do with particular commitments in the world, especially with regards to how we view our neighbors and whether or not we honor our neighbors.
And it's not an engagement based on power over or
That's
coercion.
Right. Yeah.
If anyone is trying to sway you based on those things, like that is anti-way of Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
So I feel
that's
like
right.
it's not a difficult thing to differentiate. I mean, the Christian nationalists are there. They're trying to create a theocracy. They're trying, you know what I mean? Like more for us, less for them. They're trying to tell you who the enemies are.
Absolutely.
Who you need to hate, who you need to scapegoat, who's in or who's out. that's not the way.
Yep.
But I feel like because that vacuum, like, and this goes back to dominionist theology. I mean, I came from more to faith movement that I felt like was a very weird sect, and now it's just in the mainstream, like it's in the artery of mega churches, and people don't even know what they've been hijacked by.
Right.
Like, it's so in the water. And so that's hijacked people that would have never been there theologically 20, 30 years ago. But it's like, oh no, that's what it means to be a Christian, is we're going to take America back for God. Like that is not what Jesus came to do. So I feel like there's a way to engage that is not based in those kind of motivations. And it's really important to talk about those distinctions and to talk about engaging responsibly in a way that's Christ-like versus a way that is trying to recapture power and coerce people and try to strip rights from people that we disagree with or don't understand. Yeah.
The kingdom of Jesus is in the world, but it's not of the world. When you talk about patriotism and all that, I'm very suspicious of America as an empire, which, whether you like that or not, it is. But America also is an idea, and there's a big difference between America as an idea and as an empire. And the idea of America as a place where vulnerable people can find each other and find a certain kind of freedom. There are all kinds of things I love about the idea of America. And I think there are many things that are beautiful. There are many things that I think are worth cherishing. And I think there is a way that it's possible to hold on to things that we find good and beautiful about the idea of America without clinging to the empire that is America, without even a whole lot of tension and contradiction there.
Yeah.
So
because even if these Christian nationalists or whoever, even if they get everything they want, if they establish the nation they want, they lose everything that matters.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like when you play this out to the end, this has been tried a number of times throughout history. It never ends well. It's not sustainable. You can't do it. It's like, I appreciate anyone who believes that life begins at conception, but you cannot legislate something like that without causing mass harm. So there's just certain things that, like, if you play it all the way out to the ends, it's not sustainable. That's not the kind of country that we want to create. So,
well, and I think I think knowing that we're kind of wrapping up, I know that could be a whole other conversation, but I think that's one of the things that's been deeply disillusioning for a lot of people, because I think for folks who have like this certain kind of theological value of life, I think one of the things that's been really frustrating is kind of this sense of, clearly, if the idea was really about life and the nurture of children, then there would have to be with that some kind of constructive vision for what life looks like on the other side of the womb. And but when that gets kind of reduced to these laws with, and I know there's a lot that we could say about this, and you could speak to of your own experience. The laws that really don't even take into account like basic considerations for the health of mothers. It's kind of and like the clumsiness of all that. I think that's part of what has caused a lot of tension, a lot of contradiction for a whole lot of people of faith, is that they thought they signed on for a movement that's about life, and instead, when that it feels more like that language is kind of being weaponized for an agenda that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with life at all. And nurturing life and community. I think that's where a lot of this dissonance started for all kinds of folks.
Right. And I mean, I feel like, I was a Republican, I was conservative most of my life. And I feel like I was drawn to that because I felt like limited government. Good.
Sure.
Less government invasion into things. That's good. Now that's been so turned on its head, where it's like the government wants to come in everywhere and be inspecting genitals and be, like tracing women's travel movements and what they do with their healthcare. And like, you can't legislate.
Costs a lot of money to do that. That's not
costs
small
a lot
government.
of money, and a lot of people get hurt. I have already lived through this personally, and I've got 3 daughters, and it's terrifying for them. I mean, if you just take rape and incest and health of the mother, like we've got every one of those things going on with our family, like things that we've experienced. And so these things aren't sustainable. So I understand having this moral vision, but you cannot do that in a coercive manner, through empire. It's just not sustainable. And that's where the argument is for me. It's just like, that's not, if you get everything that you want, you still lose.
Well, at the end of the day, and I think I hope people would hear the spirit of this, nothing that we've said in this conversation tonight has railed against even those kind of conservative impulses. I would love nothing more than if we had a robust conversation. I think we desperately need that in our culture right now. Be all for small or limited constricted government. There are all kinds of things we could say about conservative thought, quotation marks, historically, that I think would be really helpful in this moment. Unfortunately, in the MAGA era, in which really is when there is a very religious kind of ideology that is co-opted and taken over, that kind of political ideology just simply is not welcome on the right now. It's why I talk to a lot of people who historically found a home on the right that feel like exiles, that feel displaced right now, because that's just not what's happening. That's not what's there. That's not what these kind of conversations are about. It'd be great if there could be those kind of conversations. It'd be great to have conversations that are about policy and not these much more these larger kind of existential realities that
it's just culture war stuff. Such a great example of like culture war stuff is we were talking about Ryan Walters trying to mandate all this stuff in Oklahoma right now. And I love that so many of the school districts, like Edmond, we're in Edmond, it's a great school district. They're just ignoring it, you know, and they're like, just throw your fits, but we're doing our thing. I love that. You know what I mean? It's like no one is throwing a fit except the Christians trying to make a thing over nothing.
Yeah.
Just so they can get publicity and you know, rile people up. And it's like that there is a fabricated culture war thing going on that is just hijacking not only the attention of Americans, but then we cannot focus on any real solutions to the actual problems.
Yeah.
It's just all like fake stuff that we're having to engage in and fight against. And it's unfortunate because it is the most vulnerable people who are being hurt by that.
And I know we need to wrap this thing up. I would encourage you with culture wars to really think about this. We're not trying to indoctrinate anybody. Whenever you see or hear any kind of a culture war, or any sort of a culture war issue, my challenge / invitation would be, think about what it's really about. Just think about what it's about, because I don't like to speak about things monolithically. I cannot think of a time where there's been a culture war issue where the thing was really about the thing. So I would encourage you to just ask those deeper questions in terms of like the thing that's being talked about. What's really going on here? What are the actual stakes? Who's feeling powerless? Who's feeling a sense of like loss of control? What's really going on here? Because I will guarantee you, whatever it is that's happening is not the thing that's being talked about.
And what's an anecdotal story that's being used to hijack your attention to make you outraged over something that is statistically irrelevant? Because that's what's happening on the border. That's what's happening with book banning. It's what's happening with these, you know, the teachers are trying to convince all the kids that they're, you know, girls if they were born boys or whatever. Like, these things aren't happening. You can find a story out there. But these are not statistical realities.
No, it's really just it's a rampant just suspicion of your neighbor that's being peddled. And I think that's why, I don't know, that's why actually, even though it's a lot of people of faith who've got sucked into this, I still think faith is the antidote ultimately, is that there needs to be a deeper grounding, a deeper orientation that's kind of like, well, in the language of 1 John, perfect love casts out fear. And I do think ultimately, like, if you're still being led around by fear, if you're that easily swayed, if that is like caught up into being afraid of your neighbors, who oftentimes, little Bono quote for you here, are not dangerous, but are the ones who are in danger. That's a faith problem. That's a system problem in here that I think needs to be addressed. So
don't put people into categories because you hear one story that's outrageous. I mean, I love Brene Brown, who says, like, if you just believe that people are doing their best, it changes your whole perspective, the way that you deal with people. I know that not every person is doing their best. There are exceptions to that, but it's just a way of engaging with humanity. It helps you love first instead of judging, putting people in categories, making them, you know, like issues that need to be legislated or dealt with as far as as opposed to humans to be loved. And I just think that's the whole, like, if there's anything that's like the point of being a Christian, it should lead us back to that. Like, surely we need to evaluate our own selves much more often than we are trying to label everyone else out there. I mean,
Yeah.
I would think that would be enough of a full-time job.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Start in that posture of humility and repentance. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, thank you for doing this with me. Any parting words you have for the good folks?
Parting words. I didn't think about any parting words. Well,
hour and 40 minutes.
Again, I have. Are we an hour and 40 minutes? Oh my gosh, I have so much more about like the fascism, authoritarian stuff.
I know you do.
Like that might depress people or bore them to tears. I don't know, because these are the things I do in my spare time for some reason. But I've been fascinated by it. But I would say I feel like media literacy and reading things by experts who have studied things as opposed to memes and articles on social media, I feel like this could change the landscape of so many conversations. And I would just encourage people to do that. Yeah. And I feel like anytime I say that, people are like, you read too much, and they try to push back on it. And I still feel like if you don't like books, engage with long form content. You know what I mean? Like there should be some sort of system to discerning fact from fiction. There is still such a thing.
With the saturation that we have of media content and social media right now, everybody's brains are overwhelmed and it becomes impossible to find where you are. Yeah. But it's more like if you're used to be in a mall, still could be like in a national park somewhere, or you get one of those big maps that says you were here. I feel like that's what that does. Mm-hmm. Is it you can find the place in the map that says you are here. Yeah. You can locate yourself. You can locate the world that we're living in and find that, sure, some of these dynamics are different in terms of how they're converging. But at the end of the day, is it all that unique? Not really. This is really a recapitulation of stories that have been lived out over generations. And therefore, there are resources not only to name that, but there are resources to resist when we find ourselves within those histories. That's so good.
Well, and they're really compelling things that you can get down the rabbit hole and are really convincing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it just, you've got to, even the good things, good frameworks and good philosophies, you can go down those rabbit holes. So just a little more discernment that way. Find some people who are trustworthy and reputable and don't go down the dark.
The way people have read the book of Revelation has harmed more than helped in a lot of ways, but I still think there's a whole lot of ways it can help. And I love the language of the book of Revelation that Jesus says to John, come up here. And that's the idea of Revelation, is it's written from kind of an aerial point of view, that for Christians who are persecuted in the time of the imperial regime, the Roman Empire, you do get this 30,000 foot perspective. And I do think like anything that helps get us to kind of a come up here, come apart, come see this from a higher point of view, not higher like enlightened, not like we're the smart ones and anybody else is unlike, nothing like that, but just like, that's right. That's right.
If it's that place will always lead you to loving your enemies. Seeing people in the image of God, is created in the image of God. And
it's a place of exile. It's a lonely place in a lot of ways, but I also think there's a whole lot of sanity and clarity there, because there is perspective, which I think is desperately needed for where we are now.
Yep.
Thank you, friends. Thanks for hanging out. Good to see y'all. We will do this again very soon. Nicole, I hope you'll do this with me again.
Of course.
I love you.
I love you.
This has been amazing.